Inside America's Boardrooms, the informational show for board members and corporate secretaries. Brought to you with knowledge partners NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, R.R. Donnelly, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, the CEO of Boardroom Resources. And today we're going to talk about the audit committee disclosure issue that has been a concept release sent out by the SEC recently, sent out July 1st. And we think it's important enough to educate our viewers. It's important for you to take time to give comments. And so this disclosure specifically is on audit committee disclosures with a specific focus on the audit committee's oversight of the independent auditor. So joining me to talk about this and hopefully to make it clear why this is important, first of all, to my immediate right is Cindy Fornelli, who's the Executive Director for the Center for Audit Quality. Cindy, welcome back.
Thank you, TK.
And to her right is Suzanne Hopgood, who's a board member with the Mace Security International and also serves on their audit committee. Welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you.
So Cindy, I think a great place to start is let's start, if you could give us an overview on the concept release and why the SEC is focused on this now.
So Mary Jo White, the chairman of the SEC, has had disclosure as one of her key initiatives since the very beginning of her tenure. And she's also separately focused on disclosures made by audit committees. So it's not really a surprise that we see a concept release coming out now, asking the marketplace to comment on their views on whether or not there needs to be enhanced disclosure by audit committees about the work that they do. I think it's born from the fact that audit committees play a really important role in the financial reporting process and in our marketplace because they stand in the shoes of investors. And so given that the SEC hasn't really had any changes to the rules applying to audit committees disclosure since 1999, and given that Chair White has a focus on disclosure effectiveness holistically, it's not all that surprising that she would direct the staff to issue a concept release and try to get the opinions of audit committees, investors, and others in the marketplace as to what information is helpful that audit committees can put out there about the work that they do.
So Suzanne, my ear to the ground says that this might be a yawner, okay, but it's still very important for feedback. When you look at this concept release and look at the roles and responsibilities of the audit committee, what's your observation to the scope of the release? And, you know, again, to me it seems a bit narrow, but tell me what your reaction to the release was.
Well, the concern I had was that it really covers a portion of what the audit committee does, but it goes into extensive detail about that one portion. And I'll use for an example, I was chair of one audit committee that I was not very familiar with the product of the company. I went to visit a factory, met with the division head, who asked me if I was concerned because the company was not able to pay their bills. Well, that to me is a much greater role for an audit committee chair or anybody on the audit committee to, you know, ask the questions and find out what's going on in the company than to have this kind of prescriptive, in-depth, detailed process to go through in overseeing the external auditors. And, you know, it along the same line, asking questions of the auditors of, are we fully staffed? In the accounting department, do we have the right people? Do we have the right culture? Are we operating in silos, or is there good communication between people? these are things that I don't think there can be any prescriptive requirements for, but seem to me to be part of what having the right people on the audit committee do, and not a very narrow prescriptive detailed process that that this addresses.
To that point, can I just point out, Suzanne's talked about the detailed questions. There are 74 categories of questions that the SEC asks, with compound questions embedded in there. So if you count them up, which we did, there are over 200 specific questions that the SEC is asking in the concept release. And so I think that gets to Suzanne's point that the disclosures, if the SEC went down this path, and this is just a concept release, but the disclosures would be very specific and narrow as opposed to thematic and broad. And so the reader is going to get a lot of information. But my question is, would it hide the real information that an investor or a reader of the disclosures might want, because you're getting these very narrow, particular questions, the answer to those, rather than the items that in the audit committee's judgment should be disclosed to investors at that particular point in time.
Well, just back to you both, it seems like whenever you have disclosures, the disclosures, rather starting in the audit committee with the members, will start with the lawyers writing the proper disclosures to meet the requirement. And I think, Suzanne, that's what you were saying, that it's nice that all that happens, but it only seems like the only time that becomes very relevant if there's a lawsuit, so that somebody can go back and point to this and say, hey, directors, did you do this? I'm not sure it helps in any way the day-to-day investor say, okay, this answers my question. I think I'm going to invest in this company.
And I think that's whenever you have prescriptive or regulations around something, it starts with the lawyers. It's not the audit committee answering those questions. It starts with the lawyers, and then the audit committee will read what they've said and say, yeah, I guess so. But it's not a judgment. It's not a discussion. It's not asking. It's not saying, gee, we really sold a lot of product in the last week of the quarter, and could you tell me about that? Because that sounds a little bit odd to me, like channel stuffing or something. So I think what you certainly want the right people on the audit committee, number one. But I think what you want from an audit committee is us sitting there and using our experience, using our intuition, using knowledge we have about the company and the way it works to ask the right questions, to understand what's happening in the company. And there's no prescription for that. There's no prescriptive regulations that force that.
And Cindy, you have been, we're not against disclosures. For some time, we've been talking about the call to action, the voluntary disclosures that are encouraged by the audit committee. So the CAQ with numerous other groups, governance
representing audit committee members,
right.
Yes.
And I think that was in 2013 that launched, and you've been building on that call to action ever since. So this is nothing new.
Well, right, and I think it gets to a point both that you made, TK, and a point, Suzanne, that you made, or a couple of points, in that, first of all, don't we really want disclosure that is communicative? So we don't want these to be legal documents, we want them to be communications documents. And I do appreciate, as a former securities lawyer, that you do have to do certain things in order to limit your liability. But under the call to action and voluntary efforts that a number of audit committee members have made, we are seeing more informative, communicative, voluntary disclosure by audit committees. And we think that we should allow that to flourish. Because it gets to your point then, Suzanne, that the audit committee is in the best position and has the fiduciary obligation to look out for the interest of investors and oversee the entire financial reporting process, not just the audit piece. And in their judgment, based on their experience, they're in the best position to decide what is relevant to the marketplace at that point in time, as opposed to having a list of prescriptive, very particular, specific disclosures. Now, in all fairness to the SEC, I don't think they in any way anticipate that whatever they end up doing would have 200 separate disclosures by audit committees to make. They're throwing out the array of questions, but it does go to the scope. It's only about the oversight of the audit committee over the external audit process. But I think they would, even if they were going to go forward with the rulemaking, would anticipate that there would be a lot fewer of those disclosures. And if I could just take a moment and I want to be very explicit, this is not yet a rulemaking. This is a concept release. And so in SEC vernacular and in Washington vernacular, that means that they are asking the marketplace about an idea that they have or a concept that they have and are looking for feedback from audit committee members and investors. And it's just critically important, I cannot stress enough, no matter what your point of view is, that you respond if you're an audit committee member or an investor. They really need to hear from those constituencies. And if they don't think it's important that there be prescriptive disclosures, they should say so, because I think the SEC then would pivot and spend their resources and their time looking at other issues that might be of more importance to audit committee members and or investors. But if you think that these are important ideas or concepts, or if there are some of those questions that you think are important, by all means tell the SEC. And you do not have to answer all of those questions. You don't have to answer any of those questions. You can submit a comment letter that is thematic, that talks about the big picture questions without answering a single one of those 200 questions.
Okay, Cindy, so the big question is how do you do it?
Well, let me stress also that the comment period ends on September 8th. So that's not very far from now. So again, that's why I want to say that you don't have to answer any or all of the questions. And while the comments are due on September 8th, the SEC historically will take comments after the comment period ends, particularly on a concept release. So, I would urge people to try to get their comments in during the period that's open, but if you have something to say and you can't get them in on the 8th, don't worry about that. And the easiest way to find out how to comment, it's not that hard. You go to the SEC's website, which is www.sec.gov. Or you could go to the CAQ's website, or you could go to the Audit Committee Collaboration's website. Those are auditcommitteecollaboration.org, the CAQ.org, and we have instructions how to do that. But if you go to the SEC's website, you'll easily be able to, on the scroll bar on the right, see the concept release. You click on there and it tells you how to do it. It need not be long. It can be a paragraph. It can be a missive. Whichever you prefer, and anywhere in between. But the important thing is that the SEC hear from audit committee members and investors.
Well, ladies, I appreciate you taking the time. Again, we do consider concept releases an important thing to respond to. If you want to sway something in a specific direction, whether that's a concept release by the SEC or the ISS or whatever, we need to respond as board members, because that will impact what happens. So we want to encourage that, and thank you again for joining me, and that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. Be back again next week when we take a look at another critical topic to help you be a better board member or committee member. We'll see you then.
Join us again next week for Inside America's Boardrooms. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors, Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, R.R. Donnelly, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.